Eric Carlisle, Mr. Seahorse. It says on the back, "Dear friends, in most fish families, after the mother has laid the eggs and the father has fertilized them, the eggs are left on their own. But there are exceptions, such as seahorses, stickleback, tilapia, tortoise, nursery fish, pipefish, bullhead, catfish, and some others. Not only are the eggs carried by a parent, but surprise, that parent is the father. It may sound strange, but it is the truth, and this is my story about them. I hope you enjoy my story." Eric Carlisle. When I was little, my Nana would come down to Florida for the winter. She lived in Connecticut. We lived in Ohio. And she used to actually come to Sanibel, which is the island right next to Fort Myers, just off of Fort Myers, and just down the road from Cape Coral, where I live right now. And so anyhow, she actually sent us, believe it or not, this was back in the day, seahorses in the mail. And it was the most amazing thing. She sent us 2. And when we got the 2 seahorses, my mom knew exactly what to do. We were into fish and all that stuff when we were little, and my mom was very much into it. And she knew exactly what to do. And so we had these seahorses, and we had these baby, like seahorses like this big. Well, we were calling them babies, but they weren't babies. And one was pregnant. We were like so ecstatic. And we didn't know when the babies were going to be born. We didn't know how that was going to happen. We didn't know, right? So my mom was watching them very carefully and looked up and read and what have you on what was going to happen when the seahorse had the babies. And we found out that it was the daddy that was carrying the babies, and his belly was out. I mean, it was out, like it was like he was pregnant. And so my mom, I'll never forget it, was watching the seahorses, and she knew he was going to give birth. And she ran upstairs. She woke us all up. I was little. I probably was not even in school. And called us downstairs, and we went downstairs, and we all sat around the kitchen table, because that's where the seahorse were, in their little water homes. And we watched that daddy seahorse give birth, and we saw the baby seahorses. It was the most amazing thing, just the most amazing thing to ever see, and I'll never forget it. And so even to this day, seahorses are my favorite. So Eric Carlisle has a book, and it's called Mr. Seahorse. This might also give you a hint about where we might be going tomorrow for our virtual trip. Took me a while to figure it out, but I got it. Mr. Seahorse. So I'm going to read, and then I'll show you pictures, okay? All right. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me above this wind. It's really windy today. Here we go. Mr. and Mrs. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea. Mrs. Seahorse began to wiggle and twist this way and that. To love Mr. Carlisle's pictures. He has the most beautiful pictures in his books. "It's time for me to lay my egg," she said. "Can I help?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Oh, yes, thank you," said Mrs. Seahorse. And she laid her eggs into a pouch on Mr. Seahorse's belly. "I'll take good care of our eggs," said Mr. Seahorse. "I promise." So apparently, the daddy seahorse has a pouch like a kangaroo, and the mom puts the eggs in his pouch, and he carries them until they're ready to be born. Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea. He passed right by a group of trumpetfish hidden in a patch of reeds. See? You don't even see them, but there's trumpetfish in there. And look. There they are. And see how the grass would even camouflage him? How cool is that? Look at that. I hope you can see this. You turn the page, so I'm not trying to do this upside down. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Stickleback?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Delighted," replied Mr. Stickleback. "I just built a nest, and right away Mrs. Stickleback laid their eggs into it. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch." "Keep up the good work," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. These fathers have a very important job, don't they? As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a lionfish hidden behind a coral reef. Now, where is that lionfish? I don't see any lionfish. Can you see a lionfish? I don't see one. Let's see. Oh, there he is. A lionfish hidden behind a coral reef. And look, even a coral reef will hide Mr. Seahorse. Boy, that coral reef really hides Mr. Lionfish, though. Look at that. It's called camouflage. Remember we talked about camouflage? But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Tilapia?" asked Mr. Seahorse. Mr. Tilapia could answer. His mouth was full of eggs. I know, said Mr. Seahorse. "Miss Tilapia laid her eggs. Now you're taking good care of them until they hatch." Mr. Tilapia nodded his head. "You must be very happy," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So a tilapia fish will hold all of the eggs in his mouth. The daddy will hold the eggs in the mouth. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by several leaf fish hidden among the seaweed. Leaf fish? I've never heard of such a thing. Can you see them? Let's see if we can find them. Oh, there they are. Several leaf fish hidden among the seaweed. Look at that. The seaweed hid Mr. Seahorse very well. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Cortez?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Perfectly fine," replied Mr. Cortez. "Mrs. Cortez laid her eggs and I have stuck them on my head. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch." "You are doing a good job," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. Now he balances his eggs on top of his head. Seriously? That's funny. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a stonefish hidden behind a rock. A stonefish. I've heard of those. I've actually fished for those. They're not easy to find. Can you see the stonefish? A stonefish hidden behind a rock. Wow, that even camouflages Mr. Seahorse very well, but boy, really camouflaged Mr. Stonefish. But before long, Mr. Stonefish met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Pipe?" asked Mr. Stonefish. "Couldn't be better," replied Mr. Pipe. "Mrs. Pipe laid her eggs along my belly. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch." "You should feel proud of yourself," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. A pike is a really long fish. And look, his eggs are on his belly. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Bullhead?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Tip-top," replied Mr. Bullhead. "Mrs. Bullhead laid her eggs, and the eggs hatched. Now I'm babysitting." "You are doing a fine job," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. Ooh, he's got a lot of babies to babysit. He has a lot of babies. The time had come for Mr. Seahorse's babies to be born. Mr. Seahorse wiggled and twisted his way and back. At last the babies tumbled from Mr. Seahorse's pouch and swam away. One baby turned around and tried to come back into the pouch. "Oh no," said Mr. Seahorse, "I do love you, but now you are ready to be on your own." Look, they just swim away. They don't even stay with them. He doesn't even babysit them. All he does is hold on to them until they're ready to hatch. The end. Oh, did you like that story? I like that very much. I like the colors in that. Don't you? Yeah, that's a good one. All right, I got more stories, so let me get to them. All right, I'll see you in a few minutes.